Ready to go. Welcome everybody who's registered for today's webinar to today's special broadcast when we're going to be discussing the benefits of building new homes rather than buying established ones. I'm going to be having that discussion with Danny Buxton and Paul Mergard of 000 Property, who are members of the Hotspotting panel of partners. They specialise in helping people generate wealth through creating new properties. I think today's topic speaks to an evolving trend in real estate. The investors are no longer satisfied with the old method of buying a home, finding a tenant, waiting for it to grow in value, what's generally known as passive investment. Under that old passive model, you waited for the market to rise to create equity, which is the difference between what you own and what the property is worth. Today, we're going to talk about how you can actually manufacture equity quickly and with a high degree of safety through building new properties. Danny Buxton and Paul Mergard are strong advocates of the intrinsic benefits of investing in new real estate, and they're going to present some case studies to show you different ways that you can do that. We're going to talk about how to invest in specialist housing as well. That's housing designed to suit people who have special needs. Before I introduce Danny and Paul formally, please be aware that if you have questions, you can key those questions into either the chat box or the Q&A panel that you should have in front of you on your screens. And towards the end of the podcast, we'll try to answer as many of your questions as possible. And there will also be some special offers that we'll tell you about towards the end of the webinar. So Danny Buxton, Paul Mergard from 000 Property, hello and welcome to today's webinar.
Thanks, Terry. And Terry, just as we get underway too, we'll just put a disclaimer up, which is just the obligatory stuff that we need to do. But yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to do yet another workshop with you, and we love working with a lot of your people that follow your research stuff, and obviously we love what you put out. We use a lot of your research with our clients, and so again, just want to say, what we're going to share today is general in nature. It doesn't take into account anyone's specific situation, but hopefully we can answer some questions people might have and give you some insight into how to manufacture growth in high-yielding new homes. So we will cover a couple of things today. We want to talk through just why we like new property, and I'll do that in a sec. We'll also talk about how you can achieve growth and yield together. I do find, often in a lot of property circles, you see where we might have a lot of people go, look, we don't like new property. We'd rather find an old house and do some renovations to it or whatever to manufacture that growth. Well, in a sense, those people that don't like new property often, they probably don't sell new property. So I think, any sort of property can potentially work and grow. You've often just got to look at, where someone's coming from and what they're selling. But I think that those same principles about how you can manufacture growth in existing property also apply in new property, and you've actually got more control of the situation in new property as well. And so we'll talk about that today, as well as talk about some of the NDIS housing opportunities that are around there at the moment. So we will jump into that. And again, as Terry said, feel free to ask questions. But for us, one of the things that probably, I don't know whether it's a chain around my leg or whether it's a good thing, but I have a background as an accountant. And so one of the things that I always do when I'm looking at investment opportunities, and I often reflect on my time working at KPMG, and I often look to how do I maximize my tax benefits, and again it's balancing out the returns you're going to get on your property or your investments, and you want to make sure you're always getting good returns, but also trying to find the tax benefits that you get through on those properties. And it's one of the reasons I particularly like new property, because of the significant tax benefits you get from that. You've got stamp duty benefits if you're doing house and land packages, because you're only paying stamp duty generally on the land portion of your contract. You're not having to pay stamp duty on the full purchase price. And I know certainly in Queensland, if we're thinking about a property that's worth $550,000 and you've got a land contract and a build contract, you can save probably around about $10,000 or so on your stamp duty costs. You do have interest during construction. So you do have a little bit of that cost that has to come back in again, but you actually can come out of it from that stamp duty point of view, and if you've got those two contracts. The other reason we like new property too is you still get the full range of depreciation. So even when the federal government changed the depreciation laws in 2017, they took away depreciation on your fixtures and fittings on a second-hand property, but they still allow you to claim the full range of depreciation on a brand new property. And so, you know, you've also got a significant tax benefit there to reduce your taxable income over those first 5 or 6 years of holding the property. And look, I'm sure most people on this webinar today would be quite pleased that you still get all your other depreciation benefits and negative gearing benefits. That certainty has come back into the market, and I think it's certainly built confidence in people investing in property once again, because we're not having massive wholesale changes to the way investment property works. When we look for new property too, we're also, you know, one of the reasons I love new property is you've got minimal ongoing maintenance. Certainly for that first, 5 to 10 years, you should really have very minimal maintenance happening to a property. You're not buying a property that's 20, 30 years old and needs a new roof, or has, just needs a big renovation, needs a new bathroom or whatnot. So you've got that minimal ongoing maintenance. So you've just got more cash flow in your pocket coming through. You've got your builder's construction warranty coming through, and again, depending on what builder you're with, there are some builders out there now that are offering lifetime warranties on the structural side of their houses. And we have always tended to find that tenants would prefer a new property or a new property than what they would on an older rundown property. So your rental yield can be better than that. But I think too, when you're looking at new property, as in any property, you want to make sure the area that you're buying that property in is in a good spot. So you're looking for, what's the location of major infrastructure, employment hubs, areas that people actually want to live in. So all those fundamentals in the areas that you look in, you're still looking for that sort of thing. You're looking for, I like looking for areas where there's a variety of dwellings. So again, not a massive fan of units where you might have, 100 or so units in the one complex. They're all exactly the same by and large, and it can just create more competition for rents, and you've only got to have one person going through a marriage breakup or a deceased estate, and someone just wants to get that property sold. So, they drop the price by 50 grand or 100 grand or whatever to get a sale, and that affects all the values. We want to do properties that there's a variety of those, a variety of the type of dwellings in the area you're doing. So,
well, another point to look, there are a time and place for a unit for a client, but a lot of people forget the high body corporate fees that are taken into account in their holding costs, and when they're looking at their gross rental yields, they're negating the fact that there's significant costs there with their
and making sure your body corporate fees and stuff is, that can be an absolute killer in your cash flow and the returns that you get if you've got those huge fees coming through. So,
but we spoke about those in our last webinar with you, Terry, and we talked about townhouses, terraced houses, and units, and the like. But
Look, what I thought I'd just run into now, just quickly before we get on to some examples, is just to give your viewers. I know we've done this before on one of our webinars. We get a lot of good feedback for this because people often think, well, what does it cost me to hold a property that's new? So I want to run through a property we're currently working on for a client at the moment. It's a property on the Sunshine Coast, and I'll just run you through what the numbers can look like. So that actual property, it's worth $440,000. It's a house and land package in the Nambour area. And we know that for this client to go through to do that property, they've got around about $18,000 of extra costs that will need to go into the purchase. So that will be their stamp duty. It will be interest during construction. It'll be accounting for your tax depreciation schedule.
I get it to Washington Brown, by the way.
Yeah,
great.
Absolutely. And we also put a bit of a rent buffer in there as well, because sometimes on a new property, the hardest time to rent when it's first finished. So we just like to go on the conservative side with what we give our clients an expectation of what it might cost to actually construct. So total cost for that property is $458,000. Now, if we do an interest only, and I'll just work on an interest rate of 4.2% interest only, because I know those rates are out there at the moment. In the first month of holding that property, we're looking at an interest cost of $19,236. If I divide that by 52, it's costing them $370 a week in interest on that property. And then you've got some other costs to come through. So you've got your rates on average of $40 a week, your building insurance, landlord protection insurance on average of $30 a week. It's a new property, so there's really nothing, to be repaired on it, but you still got to get your smoke detectors checked and stuff. So I'll put $10 a week there for your maintenance costs, and then your property management fees. I'll just go at $65 there, which is probably a little high, more than likely, but look, again, will be on the more conservative side there. So your weekly outgoings is $515 is what it's costing you a week to hold that property.
So Paul, is that done on the basis of an interest-only loan for a short period of time?
That's right, yes. It's not interest only, and then the client, we've obviously the client has a right ability, if they wish to, go to P&I. We always believe it, talking to your accountant, if you have owner-occupied debt, that should be your priority in paying that down first, before you start reducing your debt that you can claim on. So,
yeah.
Okay.
So this property, the couple of rental appraisals we've got on that, it should get $465 a week rent. So it gives an initial weekly shortfall of $50 on that property. Now, when I multiply that by 52 to give a yearly amount, we've got a $2,600 a year shortfall on that property, which would be going in as a loss on your tax return. But then you've got some other tax benefits that flow through. So on this particular property, the land's worth $189,000. The build cost is $223,000, and your fixtures and fittings is approximately $28,000 on that property. So you get 2.5% depreciation on the building cost, so 2.5% of that $223,000. And then you also get, on average, over the first 5 years of that property, 20% depreciation on your fittings, so 20% on that $28,000. And this is what it's particularly on that 20% on your fixtures and fittings that you no longer get if you're buying a second-hand property. So you get that full $5,600 on average over the first 5 years. You've also got some loan establishment deductions that you can claim. So you've got some total tax deductions on that property when you go to do your tax return. If it was a full 12-month period of just over $15,500 a year. And this is really, I suppose, what we're talking about negative gearing. You're only $2,600 out of pocket in that property, but then you've got your other tax deductions flowing through as well, which again makes it quite attractive from that tax point of view.
We're certainly of the view too, Terry, that if you can't afford that $2,500 a year anyway, you really shouldn't be investing in property. It's the tax benefits there are there to, the negative gearing is there to help us with positive cash flow. But at the same time too, if you can't afford a property with those figures, you really need to look at your strategy. Yeah.
So just give you an idea then when you go to do your tax. So this particular client is on an income of that $90,000 mark. So on $90,000, he's going to be paying $21,517 in tax. You've then got your $15,575 deductions coming through. So that means that there's a new taxable income of $74,425. The tax on the 74 is $16,143, which means if you had no other deductions coming through, you'd have a yearly tax refund of $5,574, which is a weekly tax benefit of $103. So you've got $515 going out, you've got rental income of $465, there's a weekly shortfall of $50, but you've got a weekly tax benefit of $103. So on this particular property, it's actually $53 a week cash flow positive. And that's after all your costs going out, your property management fees, your rates, your insurance, all that sort of thing. We'll often run one of these sheets for all of our clients because we want to, just give that sense of what a property might cost you to hold. And again, I think people are quite surprised, particularly with those tax benefits coming through. You've got some good cash flow coming through. And that's, again, where you want to make sure then that the area is in an area that you're going to get good capital growth on as well, because it's particularly where you're making money. But one of the things that we do, and I'll talk you through why this particular house that we're looking at, it's in Nambour, which is one of the areas that, Terry, you've been talking about. I think in your report yesterday, you were talking about that Nambour and Sunshine Coast area, weren't you, Terry?
That's right. Well, I mean, firstly, the Sunshine Coast has been undoubtedly the strongest property market in Queensland for the last, I would say, certainly the last 12 months, but probably the last 2 years, and continues to be. We've just done our latest edition of the Price Predict Index, where we examine sales activity and prices for every suburb and town right across Australia. And the Sunshine Coast has actually comes joint first in the country in terms of the number of suburbs with growth momentum, rising sales activity. So the Sunshine Coast is undoubtedly a very strong market, driven by a very big infrastructure spend. It's an economy that's undergoing quite a remarkable evolution. It's one of the most compelling growth stories anywhere in Australia. And against that background, Nambour is very popular with buyers, particularly first home buyers, because it's at the affordable end of the Sunshine Coast market. Median house prices in the sort of high 300,000s, median unit price 275. Both those medians have grown 3 or 4% in the last 12 months. And yields are well above average. Typical yields for houses 5.5%, apartments 6%. And the vacancy rate for that area is just over 1%. So all the numbers are very attractive for anybody thinking of investing, not only in the Sunshine Coast generally, but Nambour specifically.
Yeah, it's an interesting play. I think the challenge for locals on the Sunshine Coast is there tends to be a bit of a stigma around Nambour being the old, I guess, town centre, and obviously with a lot of the changes with the demographics, but we see a lot of real positive news stories coming through. So there's a lot of new housing. We've noticed areas surrounding Nambour where you've got Palmwoods and Woombye, areas that we're seeing significant increase in land prices, and we're now starting to see the same in Nambour, where those certainly the land prices are becoming finding anything sub 220 now is very hard. We're probably in that $250,000 to $270,000 for a standard block. But we've got again, this is a property that we're looking at for a client at the moment, where we're going through the process where we did those numbers, and Paul just talk you through that now as we just share our screen with you and the viewers.
Yeah, so this property, and this is one we just did that example on. The land cost is actually, it's rare to find anything under $200,000. This particular block, we're negotiating at the moment for $189,000. It's around about a 480 square metre block of land.
It's right in the heart of town. So as you come into Nambour, it's like an infill block where someone's done development on the block, shifted the house across. Land is there. It's a battle axe block. But in a really quite high part of Nambour.
And you do certainly find that in that Nambour area, a lot of older houses being, knocked down, or people that have had, bigger blocks of land, splitting them up, and so more infill sort of stuff. The house, the build, we're looking at we're still working through plans on that at the moment, but it'll be around that, 250,000, 251.
We probably expected it to come a little bit less than that, but we're just going on the high numbers here. So
the total purchase price of around about 440, and then the rent appraisal on that would be 465 a week. So it's giving us that 5.49% yield, which again, in most areas on the coast, most of the house and land packages that we're doing are getting somewhere between that 5 to 6% rental yield. Again, they rent pretty quickly, and that's even in a slower period of the year. So when you're getting the properties rented, in that January March period, you tend to find you get better rents in that period. So what we would do for most of our clients is that first rental period, we just take the first rent through to that January, February, March period, so that when it comes up for renewal, you've got better chance of even increasing that rental yield even further. And so on that particular house, positive cash flow using the negative gearing benefits, basically from the get-go,
as you saw from an example. But again, Terry, this is still probably, you talked about passive and active investing, Terry, at the beginning, and we still see this as a fairly passive investment where someone's buying. There's no get rich quick in property. Property is a long-term play for clients, and we certainly do believe that. But we see this as a property that's undervalued in the land purchase. When we look at other competing blocks, we see land probably sitting around that comparatively around the 220, 230 plus. So to be able to pick up the land at a lower price, we're able to negotiate direct to the developer, so there's no agents fees in that process, and we're able to get the result for a client that they're very happy with. So, but most importantly, we see significant long-term growth in this area. We see certainly the next 2-3+ years of those values just continue to creep up and up, where they can't be able to use that equity to then do other things.
To move on to another area where, again, we think you can manufacture growth, and that's by doing splitter blocks. And we've done quite a lot of these splitter blocks over time. The example I want to talk you through here is one that we've had in Nudgee, and that we've done previously. It's only a few kilometres from Brisbane Airport. It's near a lot of your transport corridors, so you've got your Gateway Motorway, your tunnels through Brisbane. And so it's in a good area, but it was we were able to pick up a house, the older house that we were able to demolish, and then subdivided the block for the clients, and then go through to build 2 houses on it. So,
on that point too, just a word of caution to your listeners, Terry. We do see a lot of people who have been to seminars where they've paid a lot of money to go to manufacture growth through doing splitter blocks, and they're you should never do this for practice. You really need to know your numbers. You need to understand the overlays on that particular block. For example, this particular block, there was some transport overlays with acoustic overlays, because we're probably about 100 metres from the Nudgee train station. But there was also initially a potential heritage overlay over this particular block, which we were able to work through with town planning. We've seen a number of people who've come to us who have got caught where they've real estate agents sold them the idea of being able to do a splitter block without doing the proper full due diligence through their town planner. They've got themselves caught short and end up, even through the process, their costs have blown out significantly, where it's just not worthwhile doing as a project. But this particular one was one which we've done. We like North Brisbane as an area. Again, Terry, you spoke about North Brisbane just yesterday as well.
Yeah, there's no doubt that this is one of the most active parts of the Brisbane market. One of the problems with for real estate consumers trying to get good information when they tune into mainstream media, all they get is generalised data. There's one figure saying there's no growth in Brisbane prices, but if you look at a suburb by suburb level, as we do every quarter for the Price Predict Index, you find that there's all these different scenarios playing out in the Brisbane, what we call the Brisbane North Precinct. That's the northern suburbs of the Brisbane City Council area. Very much middle market. Brisbane is the most active part of the Brisbane market at the moment. And I mentioned earlier that the Sunshine Coast was joint first in the nation in terms of the number of growth suburbs. Or the location that it's joined with is actually the Brisbane North Precinct. So Sunshine Coast, Brisbane North, they both have the same number of suburbs with growing sales activity. And this particular case study is in a very typical Brisbane North suburb, which is Nudgee. And just to illustrate that there are outperformers within cities which appear to have only very moderate or no growth, such as Brisbane. Nudgee's median house price has risen 11% in the last 12 months. So it's right up there on a national basis in terms of the level of proper price growth that's happening in that market. And again, vacancies about 1%. So all the numbers are very, very strong for that precinct. There's rising sales activity, there's growth in prices, vacancy is very low. So it's a really good market to be in at the moment.
Yeah. Now, we certainly love that North Brisbane area. And look, I personally have 2 properties in Nudgee, so always happy to hear those results that are coming through. But and again, just the vacancy. I've just on one of those properties I've had. We just interested to know. We actually did a property in Nudgee. I did one there with a couple of other people. It was actually presented to a client of ours. They decided not to take it, so I did it myself. That was in 2012, and then just got built. And in 2013, we had the floods in Brisbane, which really knocked the wind out of the sails with prices. I actually got that revalued by the bank back then in just after, in March, April, do another project, and it had already gone up 16% during that time frame. And we do see and understand that this is where people need to, and I know we talk about this a lot, Terry, we do in our conversations, I know you do it on your podcast, but people need to understand that what they read in the media, that there is data and then there is data. And there are markets within markets, and you've really got to really get down into the nitty-gritty of that data and understand what's really going on in a particular area. And areas like Nudgee, Banyo, places like Deegan, we call them dodgy Deegs, and Bogan Banyo, and they're places that have really grown into places which have been rejuvenated into places that are still relatively close to the city, good transport nodes, a lot of employment, and just an area that a lot of people are now seeing that it's this proximity, where in the past it had a stigma attached to it. A little bit like Nambour on the Sunshine Coast, where it's got those transport nodes, there's a lot of stuff going on, and so it's just been able to get in there and see those opportunities and then and capitalise on them. But this particular example is an interesting one, and the reason we've done this is you'll see down the bottom of that slide there's significant uplift in that process through doing this for the client, and that's including development costs through the whole process. We had some big trees that we had to remove on this process, and we project manage all that for our clients. But their uplift, immediate uplift at completion, was around that $130,000 a side, so a 260K process. But and the yield is still very good rent, but the yield is probably not there.
What we tend to find at the moment, the rental yields the rental yields in Brisbane are not as good as, say, the Sunshine Coast. We get a little bit spoiled on the Sunshine Coast because our rental yields are exceptionally good and the vacancy rate's low. Brisbane, I guess, got hammered a bit because of all the unit oversupply, which hurt rent. We are starting to see rents come back in Brisbane and getting some good there. But again, for this particular property, the clients did it because they could make up. There was capital.
There's a capital rate to play.
Yeah. So, and when you could manufacture that growth by knocking down a house and building two and making some good money on that, it's exactly why they did it.
So the next example, which is probably the one I'd like to highlight, which I quite like, particularly is the duplex. We touched on the duplex in our last webinar, Terry, but the benefit of a duplex is you're actually manufacturing growth through developing that land. This is an example of a property, and these are real numbers that we're doing for a client at present, where we're in the Hunter Valley region. Again, Hunter is one of those areas that we see there's real improved sales activity, there's a reduction in vacancy rates, a diversified economy, tourism, agriculture, mining, power generation and manufacturing. It links to the Newcastle port, with also major mining projects, major power stations, including the $200 million upgrade to Bayswater and $400 million gas-fired facility there. I'm actually getting that information from your report too, so I'm reading directly from your report, Terry, with that information. But the Hunter is one of those areas that we see opportunity because of its proximity to Sydney and its affordability. This is a just sub 600 square metre block. We're able to do a duplex with a four bedroom, 2 bath, single garage. You can see the land there, the DA and strata process we do for the clients. So once the client settles on the land, we actually do that DA process. There's about a 6-month process to be done. And then once that comes through, we then go through the construction process. We know this block through town planners that we have no issues with the DA, and it's approved for duplex. What we like about this is the rental yield is really high. So we've had independent market appraisals giving us rents even higher than what we talked about here, but looking at that $450 to $470 a week per site. So you get a total of $900 to $940 a week, which has given us a yield of 6, 6.8 to 7.1% in rental yields. But also too, from a independent sales appraisal, we've had 4 different independent appraisals, and the median ones are between 420 and 440 per site. So we've got an uplift there of $150,000 to $190,000 in immediate uplift that we're able to generate for a client. Why I do like Duplex is it enables, it gives our client options. It gives the option of being able to keep and just have that rental yield there and getting good rental income coming through. It gives them the option of potentially selling the property and utilising the capital gain to either pay down debt or to reinvest. It gives them the opportunity to maybe tap into that equity to reinvest, or alternatively, they may keep one side and sell one side. So there's multiple options and strategies
That's, I guess, the advantage of the duplex model over the dual occupancy model, because your dual occupancy, which again, I don't mind dual occupancies if you're really wanting that yield, but you can't sell the second side of your dual occupancy, whereas on your duplex, you can sell that one side. So it's just a little bit more flexibility, I guess, there for people if they want to, sell one and keep the other. So,
yeah. And your thoughts on Newcastle region, Terry?
Yeah, look, for the past couple of years, Newcastle has been arguably the strongest market anywhere in New South Wales. Obviously, Sydney came off the boil, but regional New South Wales has been doing very opposite things to Sydney. They're very much driven by their own local economies, and Newcastle is, in its own right, a very strong economy. It's one of the largest cities in Australia, larger than some of our capital cities, and it's got a strong and diversified economy. I'd say the Newcastle market has passed its peak, but the Hunter region, the towns outside of Newcastle are still showing good growth around areas like Branxton and Cessnock and Maitland.
This particular option is actually in Cessnock council area. So yeah,
according to our latest figures, prices are growing strongly in those areas. Median price for Cessnock is up 9% in the last 12 months. Its average over 10 years is of that suburb and some of its neighbouring suburbs is 6 or 7% per year, which is a very strong, solid growth average over 10 years. Not too many locations in Australia do better than that. Rental yields are good. And again, I think you alluded to the vacancy rates are particularly attractive for investors at the moment. A number of the postcodes in the area we're talking about are actually below 1%, and then there are others that are sort of 1 to 1.5%. That's a very, very tight market, particularly keeping in mind that perhaps going back half a dozen years, that Hunter region got swamped with developers. It was a boom market and everyone piled in, and there was an oversupply created, but that's been well and truly soaked up to the extent that we now have an undersupply in those markets. So strong demand out of Newcastle, out of Sydney, good investor demand in that area as well. So we're seeing good price growth there now.
And the advantage of that particular property, it's just in a quiet street, around the corner from parks and recreational areas, and walking distance to a new school that's in the process of going through the process. So
that site, was that a bare block of land on an estate? It wasn't a house on land.
No. So that's a land where we're purchasing through the developer. Which has been set aside for Duplex, and we're able to negotiate on that through the wholesale processes that we deal with through the relationship that we have, both through our building partner and through the developers. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So Terry, just want to, that gives an example of where we can see high growth. I guess an example of a more of a passive one where we're looking at with the house and land in Nambour. We're looking at the high growth property, but the yield's probably just sub 5%. We always like to achieve a minimum of 5% for our clients, but we see that probably changing in the next little while with rents. We do see rents, or believe rents will continue to increase in some of those areas like Brisbane. Understanding too that when you do go into more expensive property, it's harder to get those yields. That example in which we can do in the Hunter, with as an example, it's not just in the Hunter Valley, but that we've just shown there. There's other areas like we're seeing a lot of growth in Ballina. Wagga Wagga is another area that we're looking at where we can look at dual keys, sub 500,000. We're still very big and we love Bendigo and Ballarat as just opportunities there, and we're achieving over that 5% yield for our clients in those precincts. And it's we do like that, and also Adelaide as well. There's some really good opportunities in that Adelaide and Launceston markets for those clients who are looking. But
I think it's a good point that you make, that there are right now lots of opportunities in markets that are showing good growth. We tend not to get that message from mainstream media. It tends to be obsessed with what's happening in the two biggest cities, which have both been in decline recently. And a lot of those other places that you mentioned are just completely flying under the radar screen of mainstream media. We're not hearing about the Bendigos and the Wagga Waggas. They're all growth markets. Very affordable for people to get into, much better rental yields than you can get in the big cities, and great potential for growth. Adelaide's another one I think you mentioned. Adelaide just never gets a mention, and it's one of the strongest, steadiest, most consistent markets in capital city Australia. And below those generalised figures that media publishes about price growth, there are many precincts in Adelaide where the market's outperforming. There's locations getting double-digit price growth, and it's a growth economy as well. It would surprise a lot of people to understand that the Adelaide economy is very strong and growing, and some big things coming up. I think it's going to surprise a lot of people when the message gets out, just how many opportunities for growth there are in that market.
Yeah, look, Terry, we also see that, for one example, Wagga Wagga, there's some stuff that we're looking just around the corner from the university there, Charles Street University. There's dual keys sub 500,000, in the 400s, high 400s, but the yields, the rents are up around that high 6s, early 7s, so you get really good rental yields. And still in one of those growth-focused markets, being a key area in New South Wales, a key regional city of New South Wales, and an opportunity exists there. But again, we can assist clients in identifying those areas, but it's also being very careful. You can say Ballarat, for example, but it's knowing where in Ballarat to maximise, because you can look at the whole township of Ballarat, but it's just finding those little areas within Ballarat where you see what's going on in that area, where there's other infrastructure going in, which is going to see those values continue to grow, just like we're talking about with Nudgee, being one of those areas where in the past we've seen some really, I guess it's that market within the market, if that makes sense.
I guess it's always knowing what's coming as well. Often I tend to find, you talk to people and go, why would I invest in that area? There's nothing there. I'm like, well, give it 5 years and see what you'll then be looking in 5 years' time and going, if only. Because we do spend a lot of time looking at what are the plans that developer, what's still to come, what's that broader 5 to 10 year kind of plan. So
what has been approved, it's not what will be approved, but what has been approved, what projects have been committed, where there is infrastructure spending, where there will be. And right behind us here in our office, we've got the new Sun City for the new Maroochydore Town Centre, and that's going to provide significant bang for buck for people who are in the immediate area with growth and value. So.
I mean, the Sunshine Coast is a remarkable story, and it's another one that hasn't got out of mainstream media because they tend to focus so much on the big cities. But the Sunshine Coast, with what's already in place with the medical precinct, but what's coming up with, you mentioned Sun Central, the new CBD. They're building a CBD in Maroochydore from the ground up, 53-hectare site, former golf course. The airport's going international. That process is underway. We've got the international broadband link coming, the subsea cable, which is going to give the Sunshine Coast the fastest internet connections to Asia, anywhere on the east coast of Australia, and a whole lot more that's happening. It's a remarkable story. It's creating growth in residential property because it's bringing a lot of new people in to live and work on the Sunshine Coast, and the top end of the market in particular has been very strong.
Terry, I was actually talking to someone this morning. I need to be careful what I say, but it's they were just telling me that they just bought, or they're about to announce that they're bringing forward a lot of their infrastructure projects in a particular area as well. So I actually haven't told you that, but they were just saying, just because of the demand that they're finding for for land in particular and stuff in that area, they're just bringing forward some of their infrastructure projects and those community facilities in those areas. So I think that's certainly going to help build reasons for people to be in a particular area.
I know of major companies that are now in the process of relocating to the Sunshine Coast, around that technology piece. And
I think innovation and technology is a very, very important part of what's happening at the Sunshine Coast, Danny, and that's reasons why more and more people will be interested in having a presence on the Sunshine Coast. The subsea cable internet connection is going to be a big part of that. The innovation coming out of Sunshine Coast University and the new teaching hospital. And we're seeing organisations like UE Insurance move what they call their global headquarters to a brand new building on the Sunshine Coast.
There are some international companies, and the international companies now looking at putting their headquarters in Australia here on the Sunshine Coast. I mean, we've got to be careful not to speak it up too well, because we love the Sunshine Coast as a place to live, and we've got amazing beaches, a great climate, and it's still it's still only just over an hour into the city, into the airport in Brisbane, we see major infrastructure projects with roads and stuff like that too, in that Boundary Exchange and the Sunshine Motorway as well.
Clearly, we could have an entire 1 hour webinar just on the Sunshine Coast and what's happening there, but we should probably move along. You wanted to also talk about NDIS and SDA housing, which is a special opportunity that people should be aware of.
Yeah, look, we get a lot of people have over the years have asked us about NDIS housing. It's something that we've been looking at quite in a lot of detail probably in the last 12 months. Just give it a little bit of a backstory on NDIS. It's the National Disability Insurance Scheme designed by the Australian Government to assist participants with independent living or getting participants into more appropriate living arrangements. The federal government's committed, and this is bipartisan, $700 million per annum to fund SDA for the next 20 years. SDA is Specialised Disability Accommodation. Here at obviously 000, we've been providing or looking at providing and are now doing so what we call ultra high yielding ethical investing to clients, coupled with that gross rental yield between 9 to 12%. We actually are seeing probably those yields are going to be higher than that, but we'd rather work on those lower numbers for when we go through figures. It's always good to get better. For us, we've been working with the Disability Sector in partnership with an NDIS-approved housing provider in preparation for the rollout this year with the NDIS SDA housing into Queensland. That was only just rolled out in February this year, so it's still relatively new in Queensland. Has been in operation in other states. But there's a significant upside, not just for our clients, but also for the greater community. Just a bit of a background. The Australian government was one of the first countries in the world to be a signatory to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And through the NDIS SDA program, as I said, have committed that $700 million annually for the next 20 years through direct substantial rental assistance to, I guess, generously compensate investors who specifically invest in compliant homes, and it's very important I use that word compliant, homes to, I guess, drastically increase the housing supply that's needed. SDA, or Specialist Disability Accommodation, refers to accommodation for people who require specialist housing needs that is not readily available in normal traditional rental market. As I said, it was actually in January, the 1st of January 2019, it was rolled out in Queensland. There is a big undersupply. In March 2018, there was a report, and there's a 60% increase in the number of homes is required. A lot of lot of research and data there which talks about the desperate need for housing, particularly for younger Australians. We're seeing a lot of people in special needs or in inappropriate care, whether it be through nursing homes where they don't belong, which is not really providing the independence that they require, that they need. The financial returns can vary greatly on the style, the scale and the accessibility of the dwelling. So there's a couple of terms I'm going to talk about here. There's what you call basic, improved livability, full accessible, robust and higher physical support. The difference in the dwellings can attract different rental yields for investors, but the investor also needs to be aware that the build price can increase quite significantly to meet the design guidelines required, and they need to be aware of the ease to convert the house back to a traditional home if the need requires. For us, we're really focusing on that improved livability, fully accessible and robust, which to us, we really feel that that's where there's a real need and there's an opportunity there for clients to make a difference, both in the community but also in their yields as well. It's important to understand the cost of the build is quite expensive, as it was certainly more expensive than a traditional build, and it may not suit your everyday investor, as you may have and we've been working very closely with a number of the valuers here, is some of the banks may not, or when they do their valuation, will only do a valuation on it as if it's a typical house, not an SDA house where there's additional costs that need to go into the house. So there may be a valuation shortfall, and people just need to be aware that that may be the case. We certainly don't see these so much as growth focused, they're really yield focused, because you might be going into an area like Nambour or like Caloundra, where we're doing some at the moment for clients, where maybe the median price in that estate or that area might be mid to high fives, early sixes, and this is coming in around that mid to high sixes. So, there is
because of it could be the video cameras or wiring they've got through the house to be able to assist tenants. It could be the extra bathrooms and stuff that you've got to put in the house, wider doors, hallways and stuff. So there's just different build costs that you've got to add into these particular properties to make them suitable.
So I guess for us is what SDA investment does is it takes 2 or 3 Australians out of inappropriate living into a place which is more appropriate to them with a housing carer. I guess too, though, I think one of the things that people need to be aware of is there can be some real, I guess, risks associated with SDA housing. I just want to talk about those now. Number one, we're seeing a lot of people, and we're seeing certainly a lot of, I guess, brokers out there who are marketing NDIS SDA housing. And as we've looked at those projects, they're really just saying it's approved for SDA housing, but they haven't gone through the compliance process from where to go. They might have built a house that's compliant with the living housing design guidelines that's available, but you need to be working with the carers, to the independent support living providers right through the process. So I've got a little fact sheet which, look, we've got information that we can send to people. If people want to email us at invest@000property.com.au, by all means, we're happy to send out some information sheets talking about the risks, some fact sheets and some more detail. There's nothing from a regulatory perspective to prevent an individual investor becoming a registered provider. The compliance hurdles that we see associated with this can be considered very practical for your everyday investor. The further complexities with matching properties to tenants, these present an operational challenge for a single asset investor and could expose that investor to a significant vacancy if it's not handled properly. And certainly those that we're seeing, and there was actually a report on Channel 7 a couple of months back where this was certainly the case, up with a builder in Harvey Bay who'd built a number of properties, or up at Harvey Bay or Underberg. And he's had them there, but they're not compliant. It hasn't gone through the full compliance process. So he's invested in building the properties, but hasn't gone through the strict regulations that are required or compliance process.
But Danny, doesn't it just emphasise the importance here, but I think across all the examples you're talking about of being willing to get on board expert advice, to have people on your team actually know how these things are probably done, the spending of a relatively small sum of money can actually save you a lot more than the cost through getting it wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. The SDA payments are actually not payable just registering the property into the scheme. It actually has to have a qualifying tenant. And finding that tenant is the owner's responsibility. So they need to have, if they don't have the right people around them and supporting them in that process, it's going to be a real risk. To mitigate that risk of high normal vacancies, it's really essential for potential SDA providers to have early engagement with with a variety of stakeholders on an ongoing basis. And that's something that we've done and we are doing and we have in place. So this may include your NDIS local area coordinators, existing disability support providers, disability organisations, aged care, accommodation providers, parent carers and participants of the NDIS, and local allied health providers. All these stakeholders potentially assist in linking the SDA provider with prospective tenants, mitigating risk. For us, we've actually been through that process. We actually have care providers who we now have 100. Last conversation, they've got 100 tenants lined up waiting for properties. But the process in getting the compliance from, it's not just finding a block of land and building the house. You've got to get the land approved because there's concentration limits where there's a restriction on the number of dwellings that can be registered in a particular area. So it's eliminating large group homes over the next 10 years where they're all side by side. So it's got to be, they've got to look at that. They've got to look at proximity to infrastructure. When you've got care providers coming in, where you've got you might be a speech pathologist or a physio, and that proximity. But the real, I think, opportunity there for clients who go through this process is making sure that they number one, mitigate risk, but also two, you've got a tenant that's probably going to be there for the next 10 to 15 plus years. Vacancy risk is a big thing, and although the government provides a 90-day continuity of payment if someone leaves, there's finding someone to replace a tenant can be a real issue there. So again, as you said, having the right process in play. As far as the SDA scheme registration risk, there is a risk that a property built to SDA standards, but the provider cannot get it registered in the scheme, which I talked about before, and we're seeing that's probably the biggest issue we're seeing with a number of builders out there. Risk associated with SDA payments, although they're paid by the NDIA for housing, they are reviewed periodically. While it's unlikely that this will stop, the NDIA continues to increase SDA pricing by CPI each year, and there's no guarantee that this will stop, but there doesn't seem to be any noise at all that this will not go on. It's interesting to note too that there is, as outlined, new dwellings will receive payments at the new build level for 20 years, and then there's a further 20 years of existing stock level. So I'm just wary of time, but I guess for us, it's really important to say that, as you said, that this can be mitigated by ensuring any particular property is designed for inclusion in the scheme has an alternate use that can be turned back. But also building your team around you is really important. And the best approach to mitigating these risks will be making sure that you've got those strategic relationships and partnerships in place, which we have. There is only, I guess, there is opportunities there. And for those who are interested in registering for that, we would encourage them to.
I think there are some horror stories around it at the moment. I had a bank telling me the other day that they had someone approved for an SDA house. They went through and built it. And the builder said at the end of the process, they've allocated the number of tenants, in this for this 12 months in this area, so you can't now get SDA tenants for it and stuff. And so again, you just got to make sure that you're dealing with the right people that actually have that backed up behind them, because anyone can go and say they can build these houses, but are they approved for SDA, and have they got the tenants to move in as well?
So, as an example, when we went for a client, here the land's been approved, the bill's been approved, the specifications been approved, it's been ticked off by compliance through actually Indio certifies. This is an example of a house and land at a 670 price point. There's just a couple of points here where there's a reasonable rent contribution, which is the disability support pension plus the Commonwealth Government rental assistance, which is $8,500 per annum per tenant. There's situational funding. Remember I talked about those three key ones that were there, from improved livability, fully accessible and robust. On the example I'm just going to use improved livability, which is the low one. There's an opportunity for on-site overnight assistance. Most may or may not. Again, it depends on the particular tenant and their needs. And there's also a location factor. So actually on Sunshine Coast, for example, you have 2 tenants in a house. A new house is 0.93 based on the government funding, or 0.91. So I just have a slide here, and again, we can send this stuff out if people want to contact us and talk in more detail. We're more than happy to do so. But you can have a look at those yields there. And again, this is just based on improved livability. If we go to robust, and these houses are designed at a platinum level where they can house robust, but you're looking at around about 8.9 to 11.5% yields. With the two tenants at the bottom one there, your standard funding of $8,500 plus your situational funding. The location factor, you've got about $60,000, or just under $60,000 a year. And that's CPI. Then you obviously, if you get, for example, we have 3 tenants with a on-site overnight assistance, you're looking at about $77,000, which will get a return of about 11.5%. So there's certainly a real great opportunity for us, where we see for some of our clients, they have a need to really have a high yielding property, but also to make a difference in the community. So they've got that ethical investing approach. But you've got a property now that will pay itself off very quickly, within say a 10-year period, and then you've got that regular income coming through on an annual basis, paid by the government. So for us, look, we're happy to send any fact sheets to anybody if someone wants stuff. Certainly, there's our email address there. Just shoot us an email at invest@000property.com.au. We also can, if they're interested in our conversation with Terry, our video series that we did with Terry almost 12 months ago. Yeah, not that long ago, just 6-7 months ago. So certainly an opportunity there to, we're happy to share those with you. Or any other information, I'm more than happy to do so. But I don't know, we haven't really left a lot of time for Q&A, but
there's also a special offer you have currently to do with an interest rate discount or subsidy that's available.
There you go. So look, we're offering a 1% interest rate discount for a limited period for the first 12 months, up to $500,000 on any property purchased through us. So we'll just rebate that back to our clients in arrears per month. Certainly contact us for the details, and we can send you those as well. So just to help within those first 12 months, just an opportunity that we provide.
And for everyone who's registered for today's webinar, we'll be sending a recording of the broadcast to everyone who registered for the webinar, and we'll include information about that interest rate offer. But if people want to follow up on any of the points that you've made today, just if you perhaps put that the final slide back up on the screen, so people can perhaps note down the contact details, the phone number, and the email address.
Yep, just doing that now. I also noticed Michael asked a question about. Oh, here we go. Sorry. let me do it now. There we go. About Boondall and Banyo, a similar growth as Nudgee. Look, Banyo is just around the corner. Banyo and Nudgee kind of almost meld into one to some extent. Banyo has always been a little bit of a poor cousin, in my view, to Nudgee. But look, we've seen some great opportunities and growth for clients. I actually did a couple of properties in Banyo a few years back, which did very well for myself. But again, it's just finding the right properties, particularly with new, where I think where you can really maximise your money in those areas is where you can see opportunity to develop a block through either splitting or doing something creative there. But this location and access to the city, with the tunnel, access to the gateway, and now that dig and deviation's all been sorted out, certainly traffic flow is certainly a lot better. So.
Okay. There was a question earlier, Danny and Paul, about the specialist property, NDIS property, for example, needs to be built to certain specifications so that the special needs of the future occupants are catered for. Yep. Can those sorts of properties be readily occupied? Thinking about future resale value, can those properties be readily occupied by people who don't have those special needs?
Absolutely. I mean, like, for example, the house that we're doing at the moment, it's still a 4-bedroom house with a double lock-up garage, with a laundry, with a kitchen. I mean, look, you're going to have larger bathrooms, you're going to have showers without steps. I mean, there's going to be no steps in the house because there's ramps and the like. But in fact, it was interesting talking and having a conversation with one of the valuers here in our building is the benefit too is it's also providing housing that may actually suit some of our older generation or more senior citizens as well. But it's still a 4-bedroom house. And it's still, yes, there's probably, you might need to spend a little bit of money to remove some of those handles on certain walls or different things that are in play, but they're the things you need to be thinking about and be aware of. Yeah. In this particular design, we've got doors that lead out of every bedroom, and that's part of the requirement to the outside. Out of every bedroom doors, but also the outside, just for ease and access out in the case of emergency. So.
There's a question there about referring to NDIS properties. How much shortfall have you seen in the past? I think you might be referring to the valuation shortfall that you referred to. And
it's case by case, but again, it's our experience probably anywhere at $30,000-$40,000. Valuations are a subjective thing by valuers, so it depends on that valuer's view on that day when they're going into that area and what they're looking at and the information they've been given. But interesting enough, we actually have one of the valuers that we've been working with, have actually registered to do some themselves because they're just looking for that high yield and that return. But again, it's not for everybody. And understanding too, the banks, when they're looking at probably won't service on the 8%, 9%, 10%, 12% yield. They're probably going to look at a maximum of around about 6% yield. So
most of the banks I've talked to, they've said they'll only service on that 6%.
So talking to a specialist lender in that space is really important. We do have a couple of people that we can recommend for those who are wanting to go down that path. So.
Do these sorts of properties tend to come with longer leases than might be the norm with?
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, because the amount of work goes into the tenant going into the property, the tenant really, and when we talk to the care providers, they're pretty much saying, look, once the tenant goes in, they're there for life. They don't want to leave, and because they're coordinating people coming to visit the house as well as putting management plans in place. Depending on different organisations are different, where there could be a head lease, which could be a 5x5, it could be a 10x10, it could be initially a 2x2x2. Talking to one of the NDS providers that we actually just renting some of our normal housing where they've actually made amendments to. Initially, they've gone for a 1-year lease, yet they're spending probably $30,000 retrofitting some things to the house. They're not going to suddenly walk away. In fact, they would prefer to do a 5-year by 5-year ongoing lease. We feel, and certainly the experience and what we're hearing. Obviously, we haven't had any that have gone for more than that period of time, but certainly the care providers are the longer the better is what they're looking for in that process.
There's a question that's come through, Danny and Paul, asking about finance aspects. Are NDIS properties treated as commercial or residential properties?
Great question. Some banks will look at it as a commercial, and that's why it's probably working with a specialist lender or finding a good broker or a financier or a bank that understands NDIS. SDA housing, it is still relatively new in Australia, and so the banks are kind of taking a wait and see approach. And then I guess to us, the real opportunity for those clients, for those who are stepping into it sooner than later, are the ones who are probably going to benefit the most, because there is, they're picking up those specific oversupply of tenants right now. But there are going to be some challenges, as I said, with lending. If the process may take a little bit longer. One of our clients, they're just going through a normal lend as if it's a normal house, and they've just got a bit of a war chest there in their lending, which they know that if with the valuation coming in a little bit under, they're not too worried about it. They've just utilise a bit more of their equity or cash reserves to go that through, knowing the yield is there.
Okay, well, we could go on discussing this.
We can do a topic on this, just on this alone.
Well, yeah, I mean, I personally find it really interesting. I mean, there are so many new things evolving in the new build real estate scene in terms of specialist products designed for people with particular needs of all sorts. And what we'll be talking about today with NDIS property, SDA property is just one of them. Maybe we need to.
We've just skimmed over the numbers here, so we've only really skimmed over it as a topic. There's a lot more information that is there for us to be able to present and give. As I said, anyone who's interested, just shoot us an email on that screen there. We can then send them some fact sheets talking about the risks associated with and a case with these numbers that we're just showing here. So then they can then, if they're interested, they can then register with us, and then as each property becomes available, we can then present as an offering. So,
okay, all right, Danny and Paul. On that note, I think we'll wrap it up. We've gone a little bit over the hour. That's okay. Interesting topics and lots to talk about. If anybody would like to follow up and find out more, I urge you to contact 000 Property, either using the email or the phone numbers that are on the screen. Thanks, Danny and Paul, for your presentation today. Fascinating as always. Lots of subtopics that have come out of it that might be useful issues for us to attack in future webinars, which we'll be doing regularly as we move forward. Don't forget those special offers if you'd like to access the Conversations with video series. Again, contact 000 Property, and don't forget that special offer of a 1% interest rate discount that Danny described a little bit earlier. So thanks, guys, and thank you everyone for participating today. Just a reminder that everyone who's registered will receive a recording of the webinar. But that's it for now. Terry Ryder from Hotspotting. Saying thanks to Danny Buxton and Paul Mergard of 000 Property, and signing off for now. Bye for now.
Thanks, Terry. Thank you.